Is that the cook they're letting speak to a bunch of war heroes? The voice sliced through the midday buzz like a bayonet, sharp, amused, and loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. Dean Rivers didn't flinch. He simply bent down, zipped his daughter's pink jacket up to her chin, and gave her a warm, steady look that said, "You're okay. I've got you." The crowd had gathered at the open-air pavilion of Fort Bridger, a decommissioned Air Force base turned community hub for veterans and military families. Flags snapped in the spring wind, retirees in crisp uniforms, young officers in dress blues, and civilians with plastic cups of lemonade packed the bleachers. On stage, the mic popped once before the event host cleared her throat. "And now," she smiled into the crowd, "please welcome Dean Rivers, Army combat medic, now head chef at Hope Haven Community Kitchen, and a man whose story of recovery and resilience inspires many of us today." Applause. Polite, but light. Dean stood up slowly, lifted Mia into the front row seat beside the stage, and walked up the wooden steps with the quiet grace of someone who'd once learned to move silently through dust and gunfire. His long-sleeved shirt was rolled to the elbows, his forearms crisscrossed with faded scars. He didn't wear ribbons or medals, just a simple metal watch and a wedding band he never removed. Behind him, leaning against a pole with his arms crossed, stood Jet Carson, chiseled, grinning, and already halfway through a bottle of some performance hydration brand. Beside him, his older sister, Kara Carson, stood like a statue, motionless, razor-eyed. The only thing sharper than her jawline was the way her eyes cut straight through people. Jet smirked. "Bet he opens with a soup metaphor." Kara didn't laugh. Dean adjusted the mic. He didn't clear his throat or tap the stand like most nervous speakers. He just looked at the crowd, not past them, through them. "When I got back from Kandahar, I couldn't sleep for 19 months. I learned how to hold a chef's knife before I remembered how to hold my daughter's hand without flinching." Silence. A few heads turned. Mia, tiny feet swinging, beamed proudly. Dean continued, voice low but unwavering. "They teach you how to survive combat. They don't teach you how to survive coming home. You get medals for wounds that bleed. But some of us," he paused just long enough, "some of us carry wounds that smile back in the mirror every morning." Jet rolled his eyes. Jesus, he is doing a soup metaphor. But the audience was no longer paying attention to Jet. They were locked in. Some days, I didn't want to wake up. Others, I'd wake up and wish I hadn't stopped my buddy from bleeding out, because it should have been me. You don't have to be in combat to feel broken. Life breaks you in a million quiet ways. But I found healing in a hot kitchen, with a $12 apron, and a 5-year-old girl who refused to let go of my leg while I stirred lentils. A soft laugh rippled through the veterans. A few wiped their eyes. Some of them knew that feeling. Too well. Dean looked down at Mia, then back at the crowd. Healing takes heat, pressure, time, and sometimes someone to believe in you when you don't believe in yourself. Before the applause could begin, Jet pushed off the pole. "Cute speech, Doc. Tell us, do you serve hugs with that soup?" A few people chuckled uncomfortably. The moment teetered. Kara's arms stayed crossed. Her eyes didn't move. Dean looked at Jet, calm and unshaken. "I serve hope," he said, "and I can tell when someone's starving for it." The crowd oohed. Even Kara's eyebrow twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. Jet stepped forward, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Tell you what, Chef Boyardee, why don't we settle this the old-fashioned way? Gloves, you and me, 3 minutes, right now. You want to teach about healing? Let's see if you can take a hit." Someone laughed. Someone gasped. Kara didn't blink. Dean looked at Mia, then back at Jet. Then he said the last thing anyone expected. 3 minutes, he said, nodding. That's all I need. 20 minutes later, the crowd had moved from the pavilion to the gymnasium on base. A cavernous hall with faded red mats, aged lockers, and the ghostly scent of sweat and pride lingering in the air. A ring had been pulled from storage, 2 sets of gloves tossed onto a table. Jet bounced on his heels like a show pony. Kara stood near the wall, arms folded, watching like a hawk about to test the wind. Dean? He was sitting quietly on the bench, taping his hands. No warm-ups, no bouncing, just silence. "You sure you're up for this?" a volunteer asked him. Dean didn't look up. "I've survived worse men than him, and worse reasons." Mia sat on the bleachers with an older vet in a cap labeled Vietnam. She looked worried. The old man leaned down and said, "Your dad's gonna be just fine, sweetheart. He ain't here to win. He's here to remind that boy what respect looks like." The bell rang. Jet charged. Dean didn't move. And in that moment, everything changed. The first punch missed Dean's jaw by half an inch. It cut through the air with a hiss and would have knocked down a lesser man. But Dean sidestepped it with an ease that didn't match his quiet demeanor. He didn't even raise his gloves high. His shoulders were loose, his breathing even, like a man on a morning walk, not facing a military boxing champion in front of a bloodthirsty crowd. Jet Carson wasn't used to that kind of calm. It irritated him. "Come on, old man. This ain't a yoga class," Jet barked, dancing sideways, shoulders twitching with energy. "You gonna hug me into submission?" Dean said nothing. His eyes stayed locked on Jet's center line, not his fists, not his feet. Just the place a heart should be. Jet jabbed again, missed again. The crowd murmured. Dean didn't swing. He just watched, like a doctor studying symptoms, like a man who'd seen real violence and now recognized its clumsy imitators. "Fight me!" Jet roared, his voice cracking. Dean tilted his head slightly. "Why? You already lost the moment you made it about ego." That sentence landed harder than any punch could have. Kara, watching from the wall, blinked for the first time since the match began. Her eyes narrowed. Something about the way Dean stood, rooted, calm, measured, bothered her. Jet lunged again. His fist connected with Dean's ribs. A clean shot, the kind that wins tournaments. Dean grunted, stepped back, and smiled slightly. "You hit like a man who's never been scared," he said softly. Jet flinched, as if the words stung more than the impact. "What's that supposed to mean?" Dean didn't answer. He simply circled, steady, watching, letting Jet burn his energy, letting the man unravel himself. The crowd leaned in. The atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a match anymore. It was a lesson. Time check. 1 minute down. 2 to go. Jet's next combo was fast, furious, and full of noise. But Dean moved like water, slipping, ducking, blocking. The way he absorbed a glancing hook to the shoulder and rolled with it. It wasn't flashy. It was efficient. Old school. War-born. Someone in the audience whispered, "He's not fighting back." Another muttered, "No, he's waiting." Jet's breath grew heavier, his punches sloppier. Dean finally spoke again, low but steady. "You ever hold a man's heart in your hands, Jet? Not metaphorically. I mean literally. While he bleeds out on your boots and calls for his mother." Jet hesitated mid-swing. Dean stepped just to the left and whispered, "That's what makes you a warrior. Not this." He tapped Jet's chest lightly, once, with his glove. Tap, not punch. Jet staggered backward as if the words carried more force than a hook. Dean continued, voice quiet enough for only Jet, and maybe Kara, to hear. You fight to prove something. I fight because I promised my daughter I'd never disappear again. Scared then, with surgical precision, Dean shifted his weight, planted his feet, and, with the same stillness that defined every second of his movement, let fly a single uppercut. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't angry. It was clean. The sound echoed, a sharp thwack, like a book slamming shut. Jet's head snapped back, and he crumpled to one knee, dazed. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The crowd gasped. Then silence. Thick. Heavy. Dean didn't move. Kara stepped forward slightly. Jet looked up, blinking. He wasn't hurt badly, but he was humiliated, and for the first time in a long time, humbled. Dean knelt beside him. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said gently. I was trying to show you something your rank, your power, and your followers won't. Jet stared at him, stunned. Dean continued, voice like warm steel. Real strength doesn't flex. It forgives. Ding. The bell rang. 3 minutes. Done. Dean stood, offered a hand. Jet hesitated, then took it. From the bleachers, Mia clapped. The old Vietnam vet next to her smiled wide. I told you, kid, he whispered. That's not a fighter. That's a father with purpose. Kara didn't clap. She didn't move. But something flickered across her face, something like confusion or curiosity. Later, in the locker room, Jet sat on the bench, towel over his head. His gloves rested on the floor, laces undone. Kara walked in, arms still crossed. You okay? She asked flatly. Jet grunted. Didn't think someone who makes meatloaf for a living could do that. Kara stared at the gloves, then at the ring outside the open door. She turned to leave, but paused, then muttered, just loud enough, maybe next time, don't swing at a man who's already lived through hell. As she left, Dean walked in from the hallway. They locked eyes. She nodded, the faintest gesture. He nodded back. It wasn't peace, but it was the start of something more dangerous. Respect. The gym was nearly empty. The echo of footsteps bounced off the steel rafters, swallowed by the silence that followed the storm. Dean sat alone at the far end of the locker room, hands resting quietly on his knees, the wraps still clinging to his wrists like faded bandages from a war long over, but never quite forgotten. His breathing was steady, his eyes fixed on the floor, not in exhaustion, in memory. Still taping your own hands after all these years? The voice came from behind, gravelly, familiar, worn by years of command and cigarettes. Dean turned his head slowly. Major William Bennett wheeled himself into view, dress blues neat, medals lining his chest like silent ghosts. The man looked like he had walked straight out of a military recruitment poster, if that poster had been burned, buried, and resurrected with a steel spine. Dean rose, not out of fear, out of respect. Sir, he said simply. Bennett chuckled. Still not a man of many words, I see. Good. The ones you do say tend to count. Dean smiled faintly. You didn't come just to check my hand wraps, did you? No, Bennett said. I came to see if legends still bleed. Dean glanced down at his bruised ribs, then back up. They do. They just don't bleed loud. There was a pause, a silence full of weight. Then Bennett wheeled closer, parked himself across from Dean, and let out a slow breath. You remember Kandahar? He asked. Dean didn't answer. He didn't have to. Bennett nodded slowly. I do. I remember the smell of burning sandbags and diesel. I remember you dragging a corporal twice your size through enemy fire with a bullet in your thigh. Dean's jaw tightened. You remember what they called you? Bennett asked. Dean looked away. Silent medic, Bennett whispered, almost like a prayer. The man who spoke with his hands, saved with his heart, and fought when no one else could. Dean's voice was low. That man died with my wife. Bennett's face changed, softer now. I saw what happened after. You disappeared. No fanfare, no farewell. You just vanished. Dean nodded once. I didn't want to be thanked for surviving. Another pause. Then Bennett leaned forward. You didn't just survive, Rivers. You kept others alive when everything was falling apart. You were the reason we didn't bury more boys out there. Dean's eyes were glassy now. That wasn't enough to save her. And there it was, the name unspoken, the grief that shadowed every smile, every slow breath, every choice. Bennett nodded, respectfully quiet. No, it wasn't, but you still saved something. Dean looked up. Bennett tapped his own chest. Yourself, that little girl of yours. And from what I saw today, maybe a few arrogant kids who needed to be reminded what strength really looks like. He let those words hang in the air, heavy and honest. Then Bennett leaned back. You still got the fight in you? Dean took a moment, then said, I've got a different fight now, one that doesn't end in 10 counts. Bennett grinned. Good answer. As he turned his wheelchair, about to leave, he stopped once more. That boy you dropped out there, his sister. Kara. She's not like him. Dean raised a brow. I noticed. She's got ice in her veins, Bennett said, but she's carrying a fire she can't put out. Lost someone close in a mission gone wrong. Blames herself. Never talks about it. Never flinches. Never forgives. Not even herself. Dean's expression shifted slightly. Interest. Recognition. Bennett finished. You and her? You've seen the same storm. You just chose different ways to walk out of it. Then, without another word, the old warrior rolled out of sight, his silhouette swallowed by the shadowed hallway. Later that night, Dean stood in the community kitchen alone. The building was closed. The lights dimmed, except for the soft golden glow above the prep counter. A pot of soup simmered quietly. Not for service. For stillness. He chopped vegetables slowly, rhythmically. The scent of garlic and thyme filled the air. It wasn't about food. It was about feeling. Mia sat at a table nearby, drawing stars with a dull crayon. Daddy? She asked, not looking up. Why did that man want to fight you if you were just talking? Dean wiped his hands on a towel, walked over, sat beside her. Some people hear kindness as weakness, he said gently, and they think hurting others will make them feel strong. She paused, coloring. Did you win? Dean tilted his head. What do you think? Mia looked up at him, then smiled. I think you didn't try to win. You just tried not to lose your heart. Dean laughed softly. Then maybe I did win. A knock came at the door. He stood, cautious, opened it. Kara Carson stood there, still in her black tank, hair pulled tight, face unreadable. But her eyes, those steel blue eyes, held something new. Not challenge, not judgment, curiosity, maybe even respect. I owe you a question, she said, hands in her pockets. Dean leaned on the doorframe. Just one? She almost smiled. Back there, when you said you fight for your daughter, was that true? Or was that just a line? Dean didn't hesitate. It's the only thing that's ever made me want to live again. Silence. Then Kara looked past him, saw Mia at the table. She's the reason you stopped fighting. Dean shook his head slowly. No, she's the reason I learned how to fight without throwing punches. The training mat felt colder than it should have. Kara Carson stood barefoot in the middle of the room, hands wrapped, hair pulled tight, eyes fixed on the center point of the floor like it owed her an apology. Around her, punching bags hung like silent witnesses. The walls were lined with trophies, some hers, most forgotten. But none of them mattered now. What mattered was the fact that she had flinched. Not physically. Kara Carson never flinched physically. But when Dean Rivers tapped her brother's chest and whispered something that made the young champion sit down like a scolded child, it stirred something in her that she didn't have a name for. It wasn't fear. It wasn't admiration either. It was something more dangerous. Recognition. She struck forward, jab cross hook into the bag. Fast. Clean. Mechanic. Again. And again. As if she could strike the memory out of her mind. You hit like someone trying to out-punch a ghost. The voice came from behind. Low. Calm. Irritatingly steady. She didn't turn. Dean, she said. He stepped into the light, still in jeans and a flannel shirt. No gloves. No pretense. You ever think about why you hit so well? He asked. I was trained well, she said, landing another perfect cross. Dean nodded. Sure, but that's not what I meant. She sighed, turned to face him. Then what do you mean? He looked at her, not the way men usually looked at her. There was no sizing up, no flirtation, no threat. Just awareness. You hit like someone trying to control the uncontrollable, he said softly. Like if you could just strike hard enough, clean enough, maybe the past would fall down and stay down. Her mouth opened, then closed. That one landed. Dean stepped forward slowly. I know that rhythm, he continued. It's the same one I used to fight with in Afghanistan. Before I realized pain doesn't leave your body through your fists. It leaves when you stop pretending you don't feel it. She looked at him, and for a split second, her face cracked. Just enough. Don't psychoanalyze me, Chef. He smiled gently. I'm not. I'm relating. Kara turned away. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know what it's like to bury someone and take the blame with the coffin. She froze. Dean's voice dropped lower, but not weaker. I know what it's like to tell yourself, if I'd been faster, smarter, stronger, maybe they'd still be here. Kara turned back slowly, eyes dark with something she hadn't allowed to surface in years. He was my fiancé, she said. Recon op in Ghazni. I made the call to split the team. He volunteered for the west route. Ambush took him out. 4 minutes before extraction. She exhaled like it hurt. He had a note for me in his helmet. I never read it. Dean didn't react. He just stood there, the quiet of him holding her together. I've broken jaws, she said bitterly. But that moment, finding him, it broke something that's never healed. Dean stepped closer. Then maybe you've spent the last few years punching the world for something it didn't do. Kara stared at him. You don't forgive yourself, do you? He asked. I don't want to, she said sharply. Because if I forgive myself, then it means it was okay. And it wasn't. Dean nodded slowly. It's not about saying it was okay. It's about saying you're still here. That your life didn't end where his did. Kara's voice cracked. He was better than me. Dean met her eyes. Maybe. but you're the one still standing. That means something." They stood in silence for a long moment, the air between them heavy but shared. Then Kara said, "You're not what I expected." Dean raised a brow. "That a compliment or a warning?" "Still deciding," she said, turning away, but the corner of her mouth lifted. Dean turned to leave, but she called after him. "Hey." He looked back. "I'm not done with you yet," she said. "You humbled my brother. That gets my attention. But you reached into me without asking." Dean chuckled. "That's kind of what medics do." She tilted her head. "Let's spar." He raised a hand. "I don't spar with people who are still bleeding inside." Her eyes sharpened. "Who says I'm still bleeding?" Dean looked at her, not smiling this time. "Only people who bleed that quietly train alone after midnight." Silence. Then, to her surprise, he didn't leave. He walked to the far end of the room, picked up a training mat, rolled it out, and sat cross-legged on it. Kara watched, confused. "What are you doing?" "Waiting." "For what?" He looked up at her. "For you to stop fighting the past long enough to breathe." The gym lights buzzed low, casting long shadows across the training floor. Somewhere, a leaky faucet dripped with mechanical rhythm, like a clock ticking toward something inevitable. Dean didn't move from the mat. Legs folded, hands resting on his knees, eyes calm. The picture of stillness in a room built for impact. Across from him, Kara paced like a caged predator. Her fists were clenched, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. "You just gonna sit there and meditate me into silence?" she snapped. Dean didn't flinch. "Only if it works," she scoffed. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to walk in, talk like you know me, then decide you're the antidote to my damage." Dean raised an eyebrow. "Who said I was trying to fix you? You're trying something." He nodded slowly. "I'm showing up." That stopped her. "I've known Marines, SEALs, Joie, Toba, Toa, SEALs, Rangers. You name it," she said, voice sharp. "And none of them ever tried to sit with a storm." Dean met her gaze. "That's the difference. I'm not trying to survive you. I'm trying to understand what's underneath the noise." She stepped closer, face inches from his. "You think just because you've seen blood and sand and grief that you get to read me like some broken field manual?" Dean's voice was quiet. "No, but I know what it's like to hate the silence so much. You try to punch your way through it." Kara stepped back. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked away, just for a second. Long enough. "I don't hate silence," she said. Dean stood now, slowly, but with the steadiness of a mountain rising. "I think you hate what it echoes." And then, without warning, she struck. A jab, lightning fast, not a brawl, not a rage out, just muscle memory, precision. Dean slipped to the side, didn't counter. Another jab, a low kick. He dodged again, cleanly, his hand still down. Kara circled him. "Fight me." Dean stayed still. "No." "Fight me." "No." She lunged, a shoulder fake, then a clean side kick. It grazed his ribs. He staggered half a step back, caught himself, looked at her. "Is this how you process pain?" he asked. "It's how I find the truth," she hissed. She came again, swinging, fast, mechanical. Hooks, elbows, knees. Dean blocked but never retaliated. His breath remained steady, his movements smooth. His voice didn't rise. "You think if you hit me hard enough, I'll say the thing you need to hear. But Kara," he caught her wrist mid-swing, not violently, just firmly enough. "No one's going to absolve you, but you." She froze, chest heaving. sweat dripping down her temple. But her fists unclenched. Dean let go of her hand. Pain doesn't need to be punished. It needs to be heard. She stumbled back a step. Her legs gave way. She didn't fall, but she sat on the mat, breathless. Not from the workout, from everything else. Dean sat too, across from her. This time, closer. "I was engaged once," she said softly, as if to the floor. Dean nodded. "He died 6 minutes after I gave the order to split the team." She looked up. "I've replayed those 6 minutes every night for 5 years. They always end the same way." Dean's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Some wounds don't close because we keep picking at them." She closed her eyes. "I kept thinking if I never let go of the guilt, then maybe part of him stays alive." Dean leaned forward. "Or maybe you just kept dying with him." That broke her. Not loudly, not with sobs. Just a single breath that trembled its way out of her chest like a truth finally let loose. She looked at Dean, not as an opponent, not as a therapist, not even as a man, just as someone who stayed. "No one's ever said that to me," she whispered. Dean smiled softly. "No one ever stayed long enough to." She tilted her head. "Why are you here, Dean?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Because you needed someone who wouldn't fight back." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. It was sacred. Then, from across the room, the sound of small sneakers echoed on the polished floor. Mia. She stopped at the edge of the mat, watching the two adults sit quietly. "Daddy?" she asked. Dean turned. "Yeah, baby? Are you okay?" Kara looked over at the little girl, blinking in surprise. Dean smiled. "I'm better than okay." Mia patted over, looked at Kara curiously. "Is she the lady who hit you?" Kara's mouth opened, mortified. Dean chuckled. "Yeah, but it's okay. She was just trying to talk loud in a language I used to speak." Mia blinked. "Oh, like when you speak soldier stuff in your sleep?" Dean nodded. "Exactly like that." Mia turned to Kara, then reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a blue Band-Aid with stars on it. "You can have this. It helps when you get hurt, but don't want to tell anybody." Kara stared at the tiny hand offering her the childish plaster. Then, slowly, she took it. It wasn't a Band-Aid. It was grace. The next morning, the gym was quiet again. The sun slanted through the high window in long golden beams that lit up the floating dust like confetti from a celebration no one remembered. Kara sat alone on the edge of the ring, legs dangling over the side, a sweat-stained towel draped around her neck. Her hands, wrapped in tape from early drills, rested on her thighs. But her gaze wasn't on the bags or the mats. It was on the small, blue, star-covered Band-Aid still stuck gently on the inside of her wrist. She hadn't taken it off, not because of a physical wound, but because for the first time in years, someone had seen the wound that didn't bleed and didn't look away. Behind her, a voice broke the quiet. "Some bandages aren't meant to cover, they're meant to remind." Dean. She turned, and there he was, simple as ever. T-shirt, jeans, coffee in one hand, warmth in the other. "I thought you'd be off somewhere stirring a pot for the local widows' club," she said, trying for sarcasm. Dean chuckled. "They kicked me out for being too handsome." Kara smirked, then looked down. "She's a good kid." "Mia?" Dean said, stepping closer. "Yeah, she sees things most adults miss. She gave me this without even asking why I needed it." Dean nodded slowly. "Because she doesn't. She just assumes if someone looks strong but feels sad, they probably need something soft." Kara exhaled hard. Her shoulders slumped a little, just enough for Dean to notice. "Does it ever go away?" she asked. "The guilt?" She nodded. Dean sat beside her on the ring's edge. "No," he said, "but it can grow quieter when you stop feeding it." Kara stared ahead, her voice quiet. "You talk like a soldier who's already buried himself once." Dean's jaw flexed. "Twice." She turned toward him. "The second time was when I buried her. My wife. She was a combat nurse. Saved 6 guys during a medevac ambush. Bled out in the bird before they landed." Kara looked down. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I didn't want people to," Dean replied. "People love to offer condolences when what you need is permission to fall apart." Silence stretched between them. Honest. Human. Dean added, "I spent a year pretending to be okay. Another year being angry. Then one morning, I woke up and heard my daughter humming in the kitchen. Off-key. Loud. Happy." He smiled faintly. "It hit me. She still believed I was whole." Kara looked at him, something flickering behind her eyes. "She saved you?" Dean nodded. "And not by doing anything heroic, just by needing me to still show up." Kara's voice cracked. "I don't have anyone who needs me." Dean shook his head. "That's the biggest lie we tell ourselves, that the world keeps spinning the same with or without us." She stared at him, eyes glistening. "I wake up sometimes thinking I still have time to change the call I made. I reach for the radio, and then I remember." Dean swallowed hard. "I still set 2 mugs every morning," he said. "One for me, one for her. I don't know if that makes me broken or just still in love." Kara blinked. "That doesn't make you broken. That makes you real." Dean's gaze held hers. "So are you." Kara looked away quickly, as if afraid of what she might say if she didn't. "I haven't cried in front of someone since I was 16, she murmured. "That wasn't crying," Dean said, smiling gently. "That was just your armor melting a little." She gave a short laugh, wet and disbelieving. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "You, me, this, space. It's not a fight, and it's not silence. It's something in between." Dean didn't try to define it. "Maybe it's where healing begins," he said. Kara went quiet again, but her breathing was steadier, her posture less rigid. She looked down at the Band-Aid one last time, then peeled it off slowly and held it in her palm. "Time to let it breathe," she said. Dean watched her with quiet pride, not for being tough, for being brave enough to be soft. She stood, brushing off her knees. "Want to spar?" Dean grinned. "I thought we just did." Kara shook her head. "No fists this time, just words." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? I've got a mean jab when I get poetic." She laughed. This time, a real laugh. And something broke open in the room, a crack of light in all the stone. Dean stood beside her. Close, but not invasive. "You want coffee?" he asked. She nodded. "With whiskey in it?" Kara looked at him sideways. "You're trying to get me to open up." "No," he replied. "I'm trying to keep you warm while you figure out how." They walked side by side toward the exit, and as the door swung shut behind them, the gym didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like something had finally exhaled. The rain came in quietly that evening, soft against the windows of the community kitchen, like a lullaby whispered by the sky. Outside, the streets glistened under street lamps. Inside, the air was warm. The scent of roasted garlic, rosemary, and something baking in the oven wrapped the room in comfort. Dean moved through the kitchen with practiced ease. He wasn't measuring, just feeling, the way only someone who's cooked through grief learns to do. the way you stir when you need the silence to soften. At the far table, Mia was coloring a homemade place card that read, Ms. Kara. The K was backwards, but the heart next to it was perfectly centered. You think she'll like the soup? Mia asked. Dean glanced over. I think she'll pretend not to, just to keep me humble. Mia grinned. She's kinda like a soldier cat. A what now? You know, quiet, sharp, but if you pet her right, she might purr. Dean laughed out loud. You should be writing poetry. I already am, Mia said seriously. You just don't know where I hide it. There was a knock at the back door. Mia scrambled off her stool. Dean let her answer it. A small ritual of trust they'd built over years. Kara stood outside, hoodie damp from the drizzle, hair tucked behind her ears, holding a pie that looked suspiciously store-bought. I brought dessert, she said flatly. Mia took the pie like it was a golden trophy. We'll forgive you if it's apple. It's not. Mia blinked. We'll still forgive you. Kara stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the warm kitchen like a soldier entering a former war zone that now smelled like basil. You cook like you're trying to heal someone, she said. Dean handed her a towel. Aren't we all? They sat at the small wooden table, lit by a single hanging bulb, the kind that made everything look like a still from an old film. Mia bowed her head and said grace, short and sweet. Thank you for food, for this room, and for not being alone. Dean and Kara exchanged a glance. That last line lingered. Dinner passed in soft clinks and quiet chewing. Dean served soup, grilled vegetables, cornbread warm from the oven. Kara ate slowly, methodically, like someone who didn't trust nourishment unless it proved itself. Halfway through, she spoke. You ever miss being angry? Dean didn't look up. All the time. Kara tilted her head. Why? Because anger's easier than grief. It's louder. Feels like doing something, even when it's not. She stirred her soup absently. Yeah. Silence is harder. Dean looked up. So is peace. Kara paused. I don't know what peace looks like. Dean folded his napkin. It looks a lot like choosing not to run, or fight, or numb out. Mia piped in from across the table, eyes wide. Peace is when Daddy lets me eat marshmallows before dinner and just smiles. Kara smiled, a real one, and looked at Dean. He shrugged. She caught me on a weak Tuesday. They all chuckled, and for a moment, the heaviness slipped out the back door with the rain. After dinner, Mia yawned dramatically and made her way to the couch with a coloring book and an old quilt. Kara helped Dean with the dishes, sleeves rolled up, water warm on their hands. This feels dangerously domestic, she said. Dean grinned. Don't panic. No one's proposing. Kara shot him a sideways glance. You always use humor to dodge? Only when I'm feeling things I don't know how to file. She nodded. Same. They worked in silence for a while, the kind that felt like a conversation just under the surface. Then Ara spoke again, quieter this time. You know, I thought strength was measured by how much you could carry. Dean dried a plate slowly. And now? She met his eyes. Now I think maybe it's about knowing when to set something down. Dean didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, some people live their whole lives without learning that. Kara stepped back, dried her hands, and leaned against the counter. I'm not saying I'm fixed, she said. Good, Dean replied. I wasn't trying to fix you, just feed you. She smirked. And give me existential clarity over soup? Dean leaned beside her. Only the best recipes include a side of soul work. They both laughed softly, not forced, not awkward. Kara looked around the kitchen. This place, It feels like someone rebuilt a heart and added chairs. Dean tilted his head. That's exactly what it is. A moment passed, then another. Dean reached behind him, grabbed a small Polaroid from the fridge, and handed it to Kara. It was a photo of him and Mia from 2 years ago. Mia's hair was shorter, her grin toothier. Dean looked tired, but happy. She saved me, he said quietly. But this kitchen, this saved what was left. Kara looked at the picture for a long time, then set it back on the fridge with care. I'm not used to being in places that don't want something from me. Dean met her gaze. Then maybe it's time to stay in one. Silence again. But this time, it was full of something. Not fear, not tension, not obligation. Possibility. Mia's voice called from the living room. Miss Kara? Yeah? Kara answered. Do you want to stay for movie night? We watch old ones with no color, but all the feelings. Kara looked at Dean. He didn't pressure her, just waited. She exhaled slowly. I think I've got one more quiet thing left in me tonight. The next morning came with a stillness that felt deliberate, like the world was holding its breath. The storm had passed. The sky, painted in soft strokes of gray and gold, spilled quiet light over the town like a promise. Dean sat at the kitchen table alone, a steaming mug in his hands. Across from him, an unopened envelope lay flat against the wood. It was old, creased, edges curled, and yellowed ever so slightly with time. The handwriting was unmistakably his, but he had never sent it. It was the letter he'd written after Emily died. Not to anyone, just to her. Because sometimes the heart needs to speak, even when no one is left to hear it. He hadn't read it since he wrote it. But something about Kara's presence, her pain, her fight, her silence, had unearthed something inside him, something that had been locked away with too much reverence and not enough healing. The door creaked behind him. Kara stood there, in Dean's hoodie, too big for her, sleeves covering her hands. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, messy knot. And yet, she looked softer than she ever had. Not weaker, just less braced for impact. You always up this early? She asked. Dean smiled without looking up. Old soldier habit. I don't trust a sunrise I didn't earn. She padded barefoot to the table, eyeing the envelope. What's that? She asked. A letter, Dean replied. She waited. He didn't offer more. She poured herself coffee and sat. The steam curled between them like something alive. Want to read it? She asked. Dean hesitated, then nodded once, slow and deliberate, like lowering a flag that had flown too long. He slid the letter open, unfolded the page with careful fingers. Then he began, his voice steady but quiet. Emily, I made pancakes today and didn't burn them. Mia said I'm a kitchen warrior now. You'd laugh. You always said I'd only learn to cook after disaster. Turns out, you were right. Again. I keep replaying the sound of your laugh. It fades a little each month, and that terrifies me. Sometimes I call your voicemail just to hear it. Sometimes I sit in the truck and talk to the air like you're in the passenger seat. Dumb stuff, like how the neighbors planted too many marigolds, or that Mia now eats ketchup on eggs. You missed her first bike ride. You missed her first broken arm. You missed me holding it together with duct tape and prayer. But I know you'd be proud. Of her. Of me. Maybe even of how I've let grief braid itself into the life we still have. Not hide from it. Just make space for it. I hope wherever you are, it's full of music and quiet mornings. And I hope you know, I loved you soft, and I remember you sharp. Always, Dean. He folded the letter again, this time with a tenderness that was different. Not pain. Honor. When he looked up, Kara was crying. Silent tears. No theatrics. "That was the most human thing I've ever heard," she whispered. Dean nodded once, then looked down. "I never sent it. I didn't know where to send grief." Kara wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "You just did." Silence stretched again, but this one didn't sting. It soothed. She reached across the table and touched the edge of the letter. "I wrote one too," she said. Dean looked at her, surprised. "To him?" She nodded. "Back when the guilt wouldn't let me sleep." Dean didn't ask to read it. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, "Sometimes the only way to let go is to say the thing you never got to." Kara breathed deep. "I said I was sorry, that I should have gone left instead of right, that he died because of a call I made." Dean leaned in slightly. And what would he say back if he could? She stared at the table. "That it wasn't my fault. That war doesn't run on perfect calls. It runs on survival and scars." Dean's voice dropped low. "Then maybe it's time you believed him." Kara nodded slowly. "You know the weirdest part?" she added. "What?" "This place. Your kitchen, your girl, your stupidly perfect pancakes. It feels more like home than anywhere I've been stationed." Dean's lips twitched. "Even with the marigolds out front?" "Especially with the marigolds." She stood up then, suddenly. "Let's go." Dean raised a brow. "Go?" "Yeah," she said, already pulling on her jacket. "I need to do something." They drove in silence, the old truck humming along country roads, the sun rising behind them like a silent witness. She directed him to a field, not marked on any map, just a wide open space where grass met sky. A single wooden cross stood at the top of a hill. No names, no flags, just memory. "This is where I left him," she said. Dean got out, didn't speak, just followed her up the hill. Kara reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Worn, tear-stained, old. She knelt down and set it beneath the cross. For a long time she said nothing. Then, with her eyes closed, she whispered, "I forgive you for leaving. Now forgive me for staying angry so long." The wind kicked up, soft like breath, and Dean could have sworn the world shifted just a little. When they walked back to the truck, Kara looked lighter, not healed, healing. Dean opened the passenger door for her. She hesitated, then looked up at him. "You think broken people can build something real?" He didn't hesitate. "I think only broken people can." The gym was different that day. Not quieter, just charged. Like a storm had crawled into the rafters and waited, breathless. Even the punching bag swung lazily, as if anticipating what was coming. Dean stood at the edge of the ring, taping his knuckles. Methodical. Calm. But inside, there was a pulse. Not of fear, of focus. Controlled fire. Kara stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw tight. She hadn't spoken much since they got back from the field. Something had shifted inside her, something deeper than forgiveness. It was resolve, but also protectiveness. "You don't have to do this," she said. Dean looked over at her. "It's not about fighting him." She narrowed her eyes. "Then what is it about?" He pulled the tape snug. "It's about showing him who I am, not who he thinks I am." The gym doors slammed open. Jet Carson entered like a headline. Tall, sculpted, all bravado wrapped in a uniform of entitlement. Behind him, his sister, Lieutenant Brielle Carson, walked with the cold precision of someone who had never been told no. Her eyes scanned the room like it belonged to her. Jet dropped his duffel and cracked his neck. Well, well, the kitchen guy thinks he can throw punches. Dean stepped into the ring, quiet as dusk. I don't think, he said. I know. Brielle scoffed. This isn't a soup kitchen. You don't belong here. Kara stepped forward, voice low and fierce. He belongs anywhere character is required, which is more than I can say for you. Jet laughed. You vouching for this guy now, Kara? Thought you were smarter than that. Dean raised a hand. Let's not waste time on words we don't mean. Jet climbed into the ring, gloves already on, bouncing on his heels. You really think this is going to prove something? Dean met his eyes. No, but maybe it'll remind you of something you forgot. Humility. The bell rang. They circled. Jet came in hard. Fast jabs, textbook form. Dean absorbed the blows with controlled poise, not reacting with ego, but reading, calculating, breathing. Then, like lightning, he struck. 1, 2. A body shot that folded Jet's stance, not to hurt, to shake the rhythm. You fight like a man who never had to earn his strength, Dean said between breaths. That's why it's brittle. Jet snarled. You think you're better than me? Dean ducked a wild hook, then tapped his glove to Jet's temple. A reminder, not a message. I think you've never been tested by anything that didn't bow to your name. The crowd had gathered. Other soldiers, trainees, gym staff. Quiet, watching. Kara leaned in the ropes, eyes locked. Jet came again, harder now, embarrassed. Pride wounded. Dean sidestepped, landed a clean counter. You fight with your fists, Dean said. I fight with everything I had to survive. Jet hesitated. That pause, that flicker of doubt, was enough. Dean stepped in, not to finish the fight, but to end the lie. He landed one final blow, clean, centered, not violent, but undeniable. Jet crumpled to a knee. The gym fell silent. Dean stood over him, breathing heavy. Steady. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his arms. He simply said, You don't become strong by winning. You become strong by losing and still showing up. Jet looked up, not furious, humbled. Brielle stormed forward, fists clenched. You humiliated him. Dean turned to her. No, he said. I reminded him what real men look like. Her jaw clenched. You think you're a better leader than us? Dean looked her in the eye. No. I think leadership is earned in silence, in kitchens, in little girls' prayers, not just war rooms and boxing rings. Brielle stepped into the ring. Kara moved between them. You want to keep swinging? Kara said. Try me. There was a beat of standoff. 2 women, both cut from steel, but only one who had learned softness. Brielle's expression cracked. Just a fracture, but it was enough. You were one of us, she said to Kara. I still am, Kara replied. But I don't follow blind anymore. Brielle's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in realization. Then, something unexpected. She extended her hand to Dean, not with warmth, but with respect. I don't like you, she said, but I understand you now. Dean shook her hand. That's all I ever wanted. As they left the ring, Kara slipped beside Dean. You didn't just win that fight, she whispered. You changed the temperature of the whole room. Dean looked around. Sometimes a man has to bleed a little truth before people start listening. Kara bumped his shoulder. That quote yours? Probably stole it from Mia. They both laughed, walking into the late afternoon light. And behind them, A gym full of soldiers stood in stunned, silent recalibration. Because once in a while, a man walks into a ring not to prove he's strong, but to remind everyone what strength really looks like. The sun was dipping low, casting gold across the porch, as if the day itself had paused to listen. Dean sat on the wooden steps with Mia curled beside him, her head resting against his shoulder, a popsicle melting quietly in her hand. The leftover laughter of the day still lingered, echoes of Mia racing through the backyard, Kara teaching her how to plant tomatoes with combat-level precision, and Dean getting mock scolded for watering the soil like a rookie. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and lavender. Outside, peace held its breath. Kara appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Dean's old flannel shirts. She had that look, the one she wore when she wasn't sure she deserved the stillness, but didn't want it to end. Dean looked up and smiled. "You know, you're allowed to sit." She leaned against the frame. "I know. I'm just not used to still things staying still." Mia lifted her sleepy head. "You can sit next to Daddy. There's room." Kara's eyes softened. She crossed the porch, sat beside them, and exhaled as though laying down a backpack she'd carried for years. "You ever think," she said quietly, "that maybe some people aren't born for peace, but they can learn it?" Dean nodded. "Same way some people aren't born for war, but they fight anyway. For what matters?" She looked over at him. "What matters to you now?" Dean wrapped an arm around Mia, whose eyes had started to close. "This, right here, unscripted, undeserved, but real." Kara looked down at her hands. "I used to think I had to earn every quiet moment, that unless I bled for it, it wasn't mine." Dean turned to her. "Maybe the hardest thing for a warrior to learn is that love doesn't demand proof, just presence." She didn't answer, but her fingers found his, and for a long stretch of time, they just were, three people, connected not by blood or plan, but by the quiet miracle of having survived long enough to find each other. As dusk fell, Kara helped Dean carry Mia to her bed. She tucked the little girl in with a care that surprised even herself. Dean stood in the doorway, watching. Not the act, but the transformation. "She's got good instincts," Kara whispered. "She's got a good compass," Dean replied. "She points people home." Later, in the kitchen, Kara found a photograph on the fridge. It was new, a Polaroid of the three of them in the garden earlier that week. Mia's hair was wild, her hands full of dirt. Dean had a crooked grin. Kara looked content. "You put this up?" she asked. Dean nodded. "Felt like the right wall for it." She smiled slightly. "I used to hate pictures. Proof of moments I thought I'd never get back." He leaned against the counter. "And now?" "Now," she said, fingers brushing the photo. "They feel like proof that new ones are possible." Dean hesitated, then walked over, something unspoken resting heavy on his chest. "I don't want you to leave," he said simply. Kara's breath caught. "I mean," he added quickly, "if you want to go, I'd never stop you. But this place, it's better with you in it." She turned to him. "Dean, I'm not used to being needed like this, not by someone who actually sees me." "I don't need you to fill a space," he said, voice low. "I need you to be in it, as you are." Kara looked away, blinking back a storm. "What if I mess it up?" He touched her cheek. "Then we clean it up together." She searched his face, not for lies, but for fear, and found none. "I never thought I'd fall in love in a kitchen," she whispered. Dean smiled. "I never thought I'd fall in love again." She leaned her forehead to his. "What do we call this?" He exhaled. "A beginning." And in that quiet, Something holy passed between them, not in fireworks or declarations, but in the ordinary holiness of choosing. Outside, the stars blinked on. Mia stirred once in her sleep, then settled deeper. Dean and Kara stood in the kitchen of a home that had never been part of the plan. And yet somehow, it was exactly what they'd been fighting for all along. Because love, the real kind, doesn't arrive with fanfare. It walks in, barefoot and unsure, and makes itself at home. There are some mornings that don't need coffee to feel alive, just a breeze through the kitchen window, the hum of sunlight on the floorboards, the sound of small feet pattering across tile, and laughter. Real laughter, not forced, not polite. The kind that rises from a soul no longer carrying its own weight alone. Dean stood barefoot at the stove, flipping pancakes like a man with nowhere else he'd rather be. Kara leaned against the counter behind him, arms folded, a quiet smile tucked into the corner of her lips. She wore the same flannel she'd borrowed weeks ago. It had never made its way back to his closet. He hadn't asked. Mia barreled in, hair wild, dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear. "Daddy!" she squealed. "She made my braids stay in all night." Dean turned, mock serious. "We may have to keep her then." Kara sipped her tea. "That was the deal, right? If I crack the code of 6-year-old hair, I stay?" "Actually," Dean said, flipping a pancake mid-air with a grin. "The deal was if you didn't burn the bacon. You barely passed." Kara raised a brow. "I was operating under enemy kitchen conditions. No proper utensils. Flour from 2008. Dean chuckled. "Excuses, soldier." Mia giggled, climbing onto her stool. "You guys sound like a movie." Dean looked at Kara. "Maybe we are." They ate slow, like people who understood time was no longer a thief. They didn't speak much, but there was no silence. Only presence, full, forgiving, and free. Later that day, Kara stood alone on the back porch, watching the wind play with the laundry. She held something in her hand, a small velvet box. Not new, not expected, just possible. Dean walked out, drying his hands on a towel. "You found it." She nodded. "It was in your sock drawer. Classic hiding spot." He shrugged. "Didn't think I'd use it. Just kept it. I don't know. For hope, maybe." Kara opened the box. Inside was a ring. Simple. Silver. Etched with mountains along the edge. "You were gonna propose?" Dean took a breath. "A long time ago, yeah. Back when I thought love came once and then it was gone forever." She closed the box gently, as if it were sacred. "And now?" Dean looked out at the yard. Mia was chasing butterflies. "Now I think love doesn't knock. It walks in when the door's been left open too long. And it doesn't always look like what we lost. Sometimes it looks like what we never thought to ask for." Kara held his gaze. "No big gestures," she said. "No music. No kneeling." He smiled. "You want that?" She shook her head. "No. I want this. Just this." She slipped the ring on her own finger. "I'm not saying yes to a question," she whispered. "I'm saying yes to a life. With you. With her. With pancakes and bad bacon." Dean stepped forward, touched her face. "You sure? I've never been more sure of anything I didn't plan." They kissed. Not like movies, not like stories. Like home. Weeks later, the three of them sat around a campfire just outside town, wrapped in flannel and firelight. Mia roasted marshmallows. Dean played an old guitar. Kara leaned against his side, her boots scuffed, her heart no longer guarded. "Tell me again," Mia said, sticky fingers waving. "How you two met." Dean grinned. "You were there, Remember? But I want the real version. Kara chuckled. You mean the one where your dad made a fool of himself? Dean protested. That was strategic humility. Builds character. More like you were trying to impress me by cleaning mashed potatoes off a colonel's boots. Kara looked at Mia. And somehow, that moment started everything. Dean added, because sometimes the beginning of something beautiful doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like cleaning up a mess. Mia yawned, then smiled. I like our mess. Dean kissed her forehead. Me too, bug. As the fire crackled and stars unfolded above them, a soft quiet settled over the clearing. Not silence. Peace. Because peace isn't always loud. It doesn't always arrive with parades or victories. Sometimes it shows up in the slow rebuilding of hearts, in the learning, in the forgiving, in the choosing, again and again, to stay. Dean wrapped his arm around Kara. She laid her head on his chest. You think we'll get it right? She asked. No, he said, then smiled. But we'll get it together, and that's better. And somewhere between the stillness and the stars, a single dad, a soldier, and a little girl who believed in braids and second chances, made a life no one saw coming, a life they wouldn't trade for anything. Because sometimes, the quiet that comes after isn't empty at all. It's everything. Before we go, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. It's always heartwarming to see how these stories are reaching kind souls from every corner of the globe. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to Soul Moments for more true-to-the-heart tales that celebrate love, healing, and the quiet miracles of everyday life. Thank you, truly, for spending time with us today. From our little storytelling family to yours, take care, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story.